Some wounds arrive so quietly that the world doesn't even notice how deeply they cut. Yet those wounds shape destinies far greater than applause. Some children are not rejected because they are unworthy, but because their light frightens the eyes of those who cannot yet understand it. And sometimes the boy, no one claims, the boy left outside every circle and every home, is the very name the world will one day rise to honor. The evening sun stretched over the village with an amber softness, washing every mud house and every narrow pathway in fading warmth, but nothing in that glow softened the heaviness sitting inside the boy's chest. He moved quietly, almost as though he feared disturbing the air around him, his small bare feet brushing along the dust as though he had grown used to making himself invisible. In a place overflowing with voices, laughter, shouting vendors, and children sprinting through open fields, he felt like a shadow, present but unnoticed, breathing but unseen. He had no name that anyone cared to remember. The grown-ups referred to him simply as that boy, the one who appeared in the early mornings sweeping the compound or carrying water too heavy for his thin shoulders. No one ever asked where he came from, and he had long stopped trying to explain. Some rejected him because he was poor, others because he had no family, and the rest because rejection is easier than compassion when poverty stands too close. Yet the boy moved through each day with a strange, quiet dignity, as though his spirit knew it could break, but chose not to. Children avoided him, not because he was unfriendly, but because no one wanted to be seen standing beside the one who had nothing. They mocked his torn clothes, whispered about the way he walked alone, pointed at his silence as if it were a flaw instead of a shield he built to survive the world's cruelty. They laughed at the way he lingered near them, but never joined in, unaware that he never approached because years of rejection had trained him to expect more of the same. Still, within his loneliness lived a softness the world had not yet stolen. He spent afternoons sitting beneath the tall acacia tree at the edge of the village, tracing shapes in the dust, imagining stories that were kinder than the life he knew. He watched birds soar freely into the sky and wondered what it would feel like to be carried by something stronger than sorrow. Sometimes, when no one was around, he whispered dreams to himself about becoming someone important, someone valued, someone whose name the world might one day speak with respect instead of dismissal. But reality always returned quickly, reminding him that dreams were fragile things, that hungry hearts were rarely allowed to keep. On this particular evening, the village felt different. The air carried a heaviness he could not name. The shadows stretched longer, the silence settled thicker, and the boy's heart beat with an unsteady rhythm he had never felt before. He sat alone, his back against the rough tree trunk, watching the distant laughter of children who had never once invited him into their games. He should have been used to it by now, yet each laugh struck him with the familiar sting of being unwanted. He picked up a small pebble, rolling it between his fingers, letting its smoothness calm his trembling spirit. He did not cry. He rarely did anymore. Tears demanded a kind of safety he had never known. Instead, he breathed slowly, letting the ache settle deeper inside him, believing that pain was simply the tax life demanded from those who were born with nothing. He was staring at the horizon, letting his mind drift into the quiet fantasy of being someone else someday, someone the world might finally choose when he heard it. Footsteps. Not the careless running of children or the heavy thud of tired workers, but slow, deliberate, almost measured. Footsteps belonging to someone who knew exactly where they were going. The boy's heart tightened. People rarely walked toward him. If anything, they made an effort to walk around him, as though misfortune could be caught through proximity, yet these footsteps kept coming. He pressed his back more firmly against the tree, uncertain whether to stand or keep still, uncertain whether danger or destiny approached from the dusk. The footsteps stopped right in front of him, and when he finally gathered the courage to lift his eyes, he found a figure standing in the fading light, watching him with a calm, unsettling intensity. The stranger did not look at him with pity or judgment, but with a knowing recognition, as though he saw something in the boy that no one else had ever bothered to notice. And before the boy could speak or retreat, the stranger said something in a voice so steady it felt like a prophecy beginning to unfold. Sometimes it takes only one gaze, steady, unwavering, quietly defiant, to challenge the cruelty the world has chosen to accept. Sometimes destiny does not shout. It breathes through the presence of the one person who refuses to believe a child is worthless, simply because others said so. And every once in a lifetime, a boy buried beneath rejection is lifted by the eyes of someone who sees not who he is, but who he could become. The stranger who approached the boy that evening carried an aura unlike anyone in the village. Age rested on his shoulders, but not the kind that bent a man into weariness. This was the age of wisdom, of journeys long walked and truths deeply learned. His robe, simple yet dignified, brushed softly against the dust as he stepped closer, the golden dusk outlining his silhouette like a quiet prophecy. The boy watched him with a mixture of fear and curiosity, uncertain why someone like this would break the invisible line the world had drawn around him. The elder lowered himself slowly and sat on the ground as if the place beside the boy had been waiting for him. His movements carried no urgency, no pity, no hesitation, only a calm certainty that disarmed the boy's guarded spirit. For a moment, they simply breathed the same air, listening to the wind rustle through the acacia leaves. The boy waited for the usual questions. Where are your parents? Why are you sitting alone? But none came. Instead, the elder studied the boy the way one studies an ancient text, searching for meaning beneath every scar, silence, and shadow. There was no judgment in his eyes, only recognition, as though he had finally found something he had been seeking for a long time. The boy shifted uncomfortably under the intensity of that gaze, unsure how to respond to such attention after a lifetime of being unseen. You watch the world differently, the elder finally said, his voice soft, yet carrying a depth that made the evening seem to pause. Not with bitterness, but with understanding. The boy blinked, surprised. No one had ever spoken to him this way. No one had ever cared to observe him deeply enough to know anything about him. His instinct was to look away, to shrink back into the safety of invisibility, but the elder's voice held him still. I have seen children who hide anger behind laughter, the elder continued. I have seen children who hide fear behind noise. But you hide strength behind silence. The word struck the boy with a force he did not know how to hold. Strength? In him. The thought felt too large, too impossible, too far beyond the story others had written for him. Yet the elder's tone left no room for disbelief. It was not flattery. It was truth spoken by someone who had lived long enough to recognize a rare spark when he saw it. The elder began asking questions, not about his past, but about how he saw the world, what he noticed, what he wondered about, what he wished he could change. And as the boy answered in hesitant fragments, something inside him slowly began to awaken. His voice, unused to being valued, trembled at first, but the elder listened with such undivided attention that the boy felt himself unfolding in ways he had never allowed before. He spoke of loneliness, yes, but also of curiosity, of how he observed people's emotions the way others observed weather, of how he understood things without knowing how he understood them, of how he dreamed of becoming someone whose existence mattered, even though he knew dreams could be dangerous. The elder nodded slowly, absorbing every word. The world has rejected you not because you lack worth, he murmured, but because your worth is too great for them to recognize yet. The boy felt his chest tighten, not with pain this time, but with a fragile, trembling hope. It was as if the elder had reached into the quietest part of him and touched something sacred, something even he had forgotten existed. The sun dipped lower, drenching the horizon in shades of crimson and gold. The elder stood, his knees creaking softly, and reached into the folds of his robe. When he withdrew his hand, something small rested in his palm, a carved wooden token shaped like a rising flame. He pressed it gently into the boy's hand, curling the child's fingers around it with the tenderness of a blessing. "This," he said, "is not a gift. It is a reminder. When the moment comes, and it will come, you must choose the path meant for you, not the one the world forces upon you." The boy swallowed hard. "What path?" The elder's eyes glowed with a mysterious warmth. "A path that will not wait forever." Before the boy could ask another word, the elder stepped back into the fading light, his figure blending with the dusk as though he belonged to the horizon itself. The token felt warm in the boy's hand, too warm, almost alive, as if pulsing with a purpose he could not yet understand. And as the elder disappeared into the evening shadows, the boy realized that his world was no longer the small, silent place it had always been. Something vast and unstoppable had quietly begun. Strength is not built in the moments when the world applauds. It is shaped in the unseen hours when a child learns to survive the silence of being unwanted. Some spirits grow sharper under rejection, as if pain itself is a whetstone carving them into something the future will be forced to acknowledge. And there are seasons in a young life when the world remains merciless, but the heart quietly decides it will rise anyway. After the elder disappeared that evening, life did not suddenly become easier for the boy. In fact, the world seemed to grow harsher, as though testing whether he deserved the attention that had been given to him. The villagers continued to treat him as an afterthought, tossing commands at him as if he existed only to make their days lighter. They called his name only when work needed to be done, never when kindness was offered. Yet something had changed within him. A small flame he kept hidden, warmed by the carved token that never left his pocket. He carried the token everywhere, touching it whenever the laughter of other children cut deep, or when adults spoke to him as though his existence were an inconvenience. The flame within did not make the pain disappear, but it gave the boy the strength to stand straighter, breathe more steadily, and hold his dignity like armor no one could see. He began to watch the world differently, too, not as a wounded child desperate to belong, but as a quiet student of human nature, observing each gesture, each expression, each unspoken truth hidden behind people's voices. Years passed like slow-turning seasons, carving him into someone the world still refused to see, but would one day struggle to ignore. Poverty became the soil in which his resilience took root, forcing him to learn from whatever scraps of life he was handed. At night, while other children slept warm in their homes, he studied discarded newspapers he found behind the village shop, tracing unfamiliar words with the same patience he once used to trace patterns in the dust. He learned numbers by counting stones, learned stories by listening silently to elders at night gatherings, and learned discipline by surviving days that seemed determined to crush him. His intellect matured quietly, shaped not by classrooms, but by hunger. Hunger for knowledge, hunger for meaning, hunger for a place in the world where he could belong. Creativity became his refuge. He built small inventions out of broken objects he scavenged near the dump site. Tiny windmills from metal scraps, toys carved from wood, small tools that made his chores easier. Though no one praised his creations, they shaped his mind, teaching him to see possibilities where others saw trash. While the world's rejection tightened around him like a cage, his inner world expanded with the force of a rising tide. He imagined futures in which he walked into spaces far beyond the village, futures where people spoke to him with respect instead of command. What he lacked in resources, he compensated with observation, watching how leaders addressed crowds, how traders negotiated prices, how travelers carried stories from other lands. Every detail became a lesson, every silence a stepping stone. But loneliness still followed him like a shadow. There were nights when the ache of being forgotten pressed so heavily on his chest that he wondered whether even destiny had turned its back on him. On those nights, he clutched the wooden token, feeling its grooves against his skin, hearing the elder's words echo across the years. Strength hides in silence, but it never dies. One evening, after a particularly long day of labor, he entered the small mud hut where he slept. Rain whispered on the thatched roof, dripping through faint holes and landing on the dirt floor with soft, steady taps. The boy gathered some old clothes to keep himself warm, pulling aside a thin folded cloth that had been lying untouched for years. As he lifted it, something fell out. A brittle envelope, dusty and yellowed with time, wedged beneath the bundle as though hiding from the world. At first he thought it belonged to someone else, perhaps forgotten by a previous occupant. But when he picked it up, his pulse stuttered. The envelope was sealed with a symbol he had only seen once in his life, a rising flame carved with exquisite precision. The same symbol etched on the elder's token. His heart raced, confusion and awe colliding in his chest. He sat down slowly, the envelope trembling between his fingers, the air around him thickening as though the room itself waited for what would happen next. As he turned the envelope over, the seal shimmered faintly in the dim lantern light, glowing with a warmth that felt impossibly alive. Something deep inside him whispered that this letter was never lost. It had been waiting for him, waiting for the moment he was strong enough to read it. And as he prepared to break the seal, he felt the first undeniable shift of destiny stirring the air around him, promising that nothing in his life would remain the same. Some messages do not simply arrive. They descend with the silent weight of destiny, choosing the one heart brave enough to bear them. Some doors remain sealed for generations until a soul carved by struggle stands before them with nothing but hope to offer. And sometimes a single letter, thin as breath and fragile as paper, carries the power to break a boy's past and rewrite his future. The moment the boy broke the seal, the lantern flame flickered, as if stirred by an unseen wind, and the world around him tightened with expectation. The paper crackled in his hands, aged, delicate, and marked with the same rising flame symbol carved into the wooden token the elder had given him years before. His breath trembled as he unfolded it, feeling as though time itself had paused to witness what he was about to learn. Inside, the handwriting flowed with elegant strokes, written by someone who carried knowledge far beyond the boundaries of the village. The first line hit him like a whisper from a world he had never known. "You have been chosen." He read on, eyes widening with every word. The letter spoke of a special learning program, a place where rare minds were trained to become architects of change, leaders, thinkers, visionaries. It spoke of a path only a few ever walked, a path reserved for those with unusual gifts of observation, resilience, and quiet intelligence. It described qualities he had never dared to name within himself, yet recognized instantly. And then, at the center of the page, a map appeared, clear, precise, guiding him toward a destination outside the village, far beyond anything he had ever imagined reaching. His hands shook. For years he had carried the weight of being unwanted, unseen, dismissed by all. Now a letter claimed he had potential so rare it could alter the course of his life. The conflict inside him grew like a gathering storm, hope rising on one side, fear pulling hard on the other. What if this was a trick? What if he dared to believe and found nothing waiting for him but humiliation? Dreams had always been dangerous territory, a place the poor entered only to return with deeper wounds. He kept reading until his breath grew shallow. The letter ended with a single line that seemed to speak directly to the child he had once been and the soul he was becoming. "Come find the door," meant only for those who endure. He folded the letter slowly, pressing it against his chest as though afraid it might vanish. His heart raced with a mixture of awe and disbelief. But when he stepped outside the hut to breathe, the night greeted him with cold, indifferent silence. He needed to know if this was real, if life was truly calling to him or simply playing another cruel trick. And discomfort, that familiar companion, settled once again inside him. The next morning, word spread through the village, not because he shared the news, but because someone had seen the strange light flicker through his window during the night. The villagers gathered around him, curiosity dripping from their voices like suspicion. He tried to hide the letter, but their whispers grew into laughter. They mocked the idea of him being chosen for anything beyond menial labor. Some said it must be a scam, a cruel joke designed to fool a desperate boy. Others laughed at the thought of anyone seeing value in someone the world had already rejected. Who would choose him? They scoffed. This is how foolish people get carried away by lies. Each word cut deeply, reopening wounds he thought had begun to heal. Yet the memory of the elder's gaze, the gaze that saw strength in his silence, steadied his trembling spirit. He could not explain the token. He could not explain the symbol. He could not explain the strange certainty growing inside him. He only knew one thing. If he did not follow the map, he would forever wonder what waited at the end of it. As sunrise painted the sky in soft gold, he packed the few belongings he owned. Nothing more than a worn cloth, a cracked gourd for water, and the wooden token that had stayed close to his heart for years. He folded the letter carefully, slipping it into a pocket he had sewn inside his shirt so it would not fall out. His steps were slow at first, each one pulling him away from the life he had known, and toward a future he could barely imagine. The village remained silent behind him, its voices no longer able to reach where destiny was guiding him. At the final curve of the path, where the village ended and the unknown world began, he stopped. The rising sun touched his face, warming him with a strange sense of promise. It was then he noticed them. 3 figures stood ahead, still composed, waiting as though they had known the exact moment he would arrive. Their long robes swayed gently in the morning breeze, and their posture carried a calm authority that made the boy's heart pound. Before he could utter a word, the tallest figure stepped forward, bowing his head slightly with a reverence the boy had never received. Then, with a voice that felt like the echo of the elder's prophecy, the figure spoke his name with absolute certainty. And in that moment, the boy realized that he had not stumbled into destiny by accident. Destiny had been waiting for him. Every destiny has gatekeepers, silent watchers who appear only when a journey is ready to unfold, arriving like silhouettes carved from fate itself. Some strangers step out of the horizon not to harm, not to question, but to escort greatness toward the world that has been waiting for it. And sometimes the people who look like strangers carry a truth that the heart has been yearning to hear since childhood. The boy stood frozen on the narrow dirt path, staring at the 3 figures who had appeared as if the sunrise itself had shaped them from its light. Their robes were long, dyed in deep earthen colors that blended with the morning haze, and their stance carried the calm authority of people who moved through life with purpose, not haste, not hesitation, but deliberate confidence. For a moment, fear slid down the boy's spine, making his breath uneven. Yet something in their presence felt strangely familiar, as though destiny had stitched a thread between them long before he ever arrived at this moment. The tallest among them stepped forward. His expression was serene, his posture respectful, and when he spoke the boy's name, it felt less like an introduction and more like a memory returning home. The boy's heart thudded painfully against his ribs. How did they know him? How long had they been waiting here? And what kind of path waited beyond this point, hidden in the folds of the unknown? "We were sent for you," the tallest envoy said, his voice low and steady, carrying the weight of truths the boy was not yet ready to hear. "The one who first recognized your gift prepared the way, long before today." The boy's breath faltered. The mentor, The mysterious elder whose gaze had once pierced through his loneliness and seen something worth nurturing, had sent them. Questions tangled inside him, but the envoy lifted a hand gently, as if asking the boy to trust the moment before trying to understand it. There was no pressure in the gesture, no force, only quiet reassurance, like a lighthouse guiding a lost traveler. "Come," another envoy added, softer in tone but equally certain. "Your journey begins beyond this point." Together, they walked across the boundary of the village, the invisible line where his old life ended, and the unknown world opened its doors like a vast, waiting horizon. The path wound through tall grass shimmering under the morning sun, past distant hills that rose like guardians watching the world unfold. For the first time, the boy felt the earth beneath his feet shift, as though he was stepping into a realm that recognized him, even before he recognized himself. The journey was long, silent, and steady. The envoys did not speak carelessly. Every word they offered felt intentional, shaped by purpose. They explained that the mentor had been part of an ancient network of scholars and visionaries dedicated to finding the rare minds hidden in forgotten places, children whose brilliance was too subtle for their environment to nurture, yet too powerful for destiny to ignore. They described how the mentor had watched him quietly over the years, observing his resilience, his precision, his depth of thought, and the quiet fire of curiosity he carried like a hidden flame no amount of rejection could extinguish. The boy listened with widening eyes as the truth unfolded around him like an unveiling. Every moment of loneliness, every rejection, every silent night had prepared him for something larger than the world had allowed him to imagine. And now, at last, the door to that world was beginning to open. When they finally reached the training center, the boy stopped, breath stolen by awe. The building rose from the landscape like a monument shaped from polished stone and brushed steel, shimmering in the daylight without harsh glares or sharp reflections. Pathways curved with intentional elegance, lined with carved symbols matching the one on his token and letter. It felt ancient and modern at once, like a bridge between worlds. Inside, the air was cool and filled with a quiet hum of knowledge, the kind that shaped destinies. Young people from different villages moved through the halls with purpose, each carrying stories he had yet to understand. The boy felt small for a moment, but not unworthy, just unprepared for the immensity of what he was stepping into. The envoys guided him across the vast entry hall toward a wooden door, etched with symbols of growth and awakening. His pulse quickened. This place felt like a heartbeat waiting to merge with his own. Just as he reached the center of the hall, a voice rose behind him. It was soft, yet unmistakably familiar. Impossibly familiar, threading through years he thought he had left behind. He turned slowly, his heart stumbling inside his chest as dread and longing collided. Someone he never expected to see again was standing in the doorway, waiting for him. True mentors do not simply instruct, they ignite the dormant fire within a soul, awakening the strength it never knew it carried. And sometimes the greatest transformation begins, not with comfort, but with the shock of stepping into a world that demands every hidden part of you to rise. For the boy, the moment he stood before the mentor again became the moment life stopped being survival and became preparation for a destiny that needed him sharpened like a blade. When the familiar voice called his name across the training hall, time seemed to halt in its breath. The boy turned slowly, his heartbeat stumbling as he saw the mentor step out from the shadows of an arched doorway, dressed in simple robes marked with the same crest carved onto the token. The elder's expression held no surprise, only a deep, knowing warmth, as though every step the boy had taken had been watched, measured, and quietly blessed. The boy felt something shift inside him, a mixture of relief, awe, and the unmistakable pull of belonging he had never felt in his village. The mentor's presence wrapped around him not like comfort, but like an awakening, reminding him that he had entered a place where being unnoticed was no longer possible. The days that followed unfolded with a discipline the boy had never imagined. The mentor did not train him with harshness, but with an intensity rooted in profound belief. He pushed him into realms of thought and creativity that stretched his mind until it trembled, teaching strategies used by leaders who shaped nations, innovators who changed industries, and thinkers who rewrote the future. Each lesson felt like a door opening inside him, revealing abilities he never realized he possessed. The mentor guided him through exercises of precision, analyzing patterns, deconstructing complex problems, rebuilding concepts with new insight, until the boy's instincts sharpened into something powerful and unmistakable. He learned fast, faster than anyone expected. His mind, hungry after years of silent observation, absorbed knowledge with astonishing clarity. His curiosity, once a lonely flame flickering in the shadows, grew into a steady fire that illuminated every corner of his thinking. There were moments when the hall fell silent as his answers outpaced trainees, older, stronger, more privileged than him. Instructors exchanged glances, whispering that they had never seen such acceleration in a child who had grown up with nothing but survival as his teacher. The mentor did not praise him loudly. Instead, he offered small nods of satisfaction, the kind that carried more worth than applause. As weeks turned into months, the boy began to change in ways deeper than skill. He learned discipline not as punishment, but as strength. He learned innovation not as rebellion, but as understanding. He learned leadership not as authority, but as responsibility, the ability to steady others even when his own spirit trembled. The mentor shaped him with quiet precision, teaching him how to turn wounds into wisdom, fear into focus, and rejection into resilience. For the first time, the boy's inner world felt seen by another human being, and that recognition became the soil from which his confidence slowly bloomed. People within the center started to notice him. Some stared with awe, others with respect, a few with envy. But gradually, the whispers changed tone. No longer was he the lonely child from the outskirts, the boy who had been unwanted and dismissed. He became the one whose potential lingered in the air long after he left a room, the one whose presence made instructors revise their plans, the one whose quiet brilliance made even the proudest trainees pause. His rise was not loud. It was inevitable, steady, like dawn creeping across the horizon until no one could deny its light. One evening, after a day filled with rigorous assessments that left him both exhausted and exhilarated, the mentor called him into a small chamber lit by a single oil lamp. The room felt ancient, lined with scrolls and carved emblems, each carrying stories of those who had walked this path before him. The mentor stood by a wooden table, his face illuminated with a calm seriousness that made the boy's breath grow shallow. "You have grown," the mentor said quietly, his gaze steady. "Not merely in skill, but in spirit. And the world has begun to take notice." The boy felt both pride and fear rise in equal measure, swirling inside him like a storm awaiting its command. The mentor reached beneath his robe and withdrew a small envelope, sealed with a wax emblem bearing an international crest, a crest the boy did not recognize, but felt immediately drawn to, as though it pulsed with a destiny he had only begun to understand. The mentor placed it gently in his hand. The seal felt warm against his skin, heavy with unspoken promise. The mentor's voice dropped to a barely audible whisper as he stepped back. "Open this," he said, "only when your heart is steady, because what waits inside will change everything." Leaving home is not always an escape. Sometimes it is the price greatness demands before it reveals its full shape. And the moment the boy stepped toward a future larger than anything his village imagination had ever held, the world around him seemed to shift, as though destiny itself were preparing to test what he carried within. For the first time, he understood that some journeys begin not with confidence, but with trembling feet that dare to move anyway. The envelope given by the mentor didn't open a door. It tore down a wall. Inside, the boy found an official letter stamped with an international crest so grand, so impossibly foreign, that for a long moment he could only stare at it in silence. It announced his selection into a global innovation program designed for exceptional young minds across continents, a program spoken of only in distant radio stories, a place where the brightest were shaped for world-changing futures. His name, once dismissed by villagers with careless laughter, now rested in ink on a document powerful enough to rewrite the trajectory of his entire existence. For a boy who had once been rejected by everyone, this was the kind of miracle life rarely offered twice. Telling his village was another battle. Some scoffed, insisting it was a trick. Others whispered that a child from poverty could not possibly be worthy of such a calling. A few looked at him with envy, so sharp it felt like another form of rejection. Yet beneath it all, he felt the mentor's belief pulsing inside him like a quiet drumbeat, urging him forward. He packed the little he owned, a faded shirt, a notebook filled with self-taught scribbles, the carved token from the mentor, and a pair of sandals worn thin from years of walking barefoot. His heart carried the rest, courage woven from hardship, resilience shaped by loneliness, and a determination fierce enough to break through even the thickest doubt. When the day of departure arrived, dawn draped the village in soft gold. He stood at the edge of the only world he had known, inhaling the scent of earth warmed by early sun. Children watched him curiously, elders studied him with unreadable expressions, and a few familiar faces turned away, unable to reconcile their past cruelty with his unexpected rise. He stepped into the transport sent for him, feeling his chest tighten with a blend of fear and gratitude. He did not know whether he would ever return, but he knew that leaving was the price he had to pay for the future calling him by name. The journey beyond his homeland felt like stepping through a series of expanding worlds. The roads widened, the buildings grew taller, and the air shifted from the warm dust of red earth to the cool metallic breeze of cities. Airports roared with sound and movement, luggage wheels clicking on polished floors, loudspeaker voices echoing in foreign accents, lights bright enough to erase the softness of home. He moved through it all, wearing an expression of awe and determination, clutching his documents as though they were the only bridge between who he had been and who he was becoming. When the plane finally lifted into the sky, the boy pressed his forehead to the window, watching his homeland shrink into a mosaic of fields, roofs, and distant rivers. He whispered a silent promise into the wind, one meant only for himself and the future he had yet to meet. Clouds rolled beneath the aircraft like endless white waves, and for a moment he felt a strange stillness, an understanding that he was suspended between two worlds, and that neither would ever look the same again. Upon landing abroad, everything felt impossibly large. The buildings rose like giants, their glass faces reflecting the sun in sharp, clean fragments. The people moved with urgency, dressed in fabrics and styles he had seen only in faded magazines. Languages blended into a symphony he could not yet decipher, and for a moment he stood frozen, gripping his small bag, afraid that he would be swallowed by a world that moved too fast. Then something shifted. Amid the crowd, a man stepped forward, tall, composed, dressed in a suit so impeccably tailored it seemed to command the air around him. His presence drew attention without demanding it, the kind of presence that carried both authority and mystery. He approached the boy with a deliberate calm, his eyes holding a depth that made time seem to slow. The boy felt his breath catch, sensing an importance he could not explain. The man smiled, slow, intentional, almost knowing. He spoke the boy's full name with a certainty that made the ground seem to still beneath his feet. The boy froze, astonished at the familiarity in the stranger's voice. And in that electric moment, he realized this powerful man had been waiting for him, long before he ever boarded the plane. Greatness does not rise in straight lines. It is shaped in the dark, where failure bends a person toward the truth of what they can become. And sometimes, the brightest futures begin with a breaking so painful, it feels like destiny is testing the strength of every bone, every thought, every dream. For the boy, the world once rejected, the training ahead would not simply challenge him. It would carve him into the legend he was destined to be. The program was nothing like he imagined. The facility stood like a modern fortress, its walls of glass and steel reflecting a world far removed from red earth villages and barefoot afternoons. Inside, the atmosphere hummed with ambition. Young prodigies from powerful nations walked through the halls with confidence polished like metal. Children of wealth, scientists' sons, diplomats' daughters, the heirs of legacies built long before their births. And then there was him, the boy who arrived with a single bag, worn sandals, and the echo of a childhood shaped by rejection. If the others were meteors streaking through the sky, he felt like a candle trying to remain lit in a storm. The first weeks broke him more than any hardship he had known. The lectures moved faster than wind, formulas twisted like storms in his mind, and the competition around him felt ruthless in its brilliance. For the first time, he saw intelligence in forms he had never encountered. Children who coded like breathing, who spoke 5 languages with ease, who solved complex problems while laughing casually over lunch. He would sit at the back of the training hall, his notes messy, his thoughts tangled, his confidence trembling every time an instructor called on someone else. Some nights he collapsed onto his bed, staring at the ceiling, wondering if the villagers had been right, wondering if he truly did not belong anywhere. But every morning, he woke with a fire that refused to die. Rejection had shaped him long before the program did. Failure was a language he already knew how to survive. And so he rose earlier than the others, sitting alone in the quiet hall before dawn, rereading lessons until they began to settle into his bones. He asked questions without shame, stayed behind after every class, and scribbled ideas across pages until they overflowed. Slowly, the fog began to clear. He learned to understand the rhythm of the training. He learned to break problems apart like fruit and taste each layer of meaning. He discovered that while the others were quick, he was deep, his mind reaching into places they had not thought to explore. Then came the moment everything shifted. During a challenge meant to test creativity, the participants were tasked with redesigning a simple agricultural tool. Most presented polished, expected solutions. But the boy thought of home, the dusty fields, the tired farmers, the way tools often broke because they were never built for African soil. His design was not the most beautiful, but it was brilliant in its practicality. It used fewer materials, cost less to build, lasted longer, and made work easier for rural communities. When he presented it, the hall fell into a stunned silence. The instructors stood still, their faces shifting from skepticism to admiration, and for the first time, the students turned toward him not out of curiosity, but respect. Whispers began. Who is he? What did he think of that? That idea. It could change everything. Soon his innovations multiplied. He offered solutions no one had considered, merging tradition with technology, survival with strategy, memory with invention. His mind was a bridge between 2 worlds, one of dust, one of steel, and he walked across it with growing mastery. Instructors praised him quietly, analysts studied his work with intrigue, and within months, rumors spread across campuses and companies. The genius from Africa, the boy with ideas shaped by hardship and sharpened by relentless will. But success came with new pressure. The more he achieved, the more the world wanted from him. Expectations climbed like mountains he was suddenly expected to scale. Meetings with researchers filled his schedule. Invitations poured from institutions that once would have ignored him. At night, he lay exhausted, wondering why the path of greatness felt lonelier the higher he climbed. One evening, as he was packing up his notes, a message arrived summoning him to the top floor of the facility, an area few students ever entered. The hallway there was silent, lined with portraits of global leaders and innovators whose work had shaped entire eras. His footsteps echoed as he approached the conference room, feeling the weight of something powerful gathering around him. Inside, a panel of influential leaders, figures whose decisions affected nations, waited with unreadable expressions. Their eyes studied him not with curiosity, but with expectation, as though they had been analyzing him long before he walked through their door. One of the leaders leaned forward, voice low, gaze sharp as fate itself, and asked the question that sent a cold tremor through his chest. A question so direct, so heavy with implication, that the boy felt the entire room tilt toward a future he was not prepared to face. And in that suspended breath, he realized his life was about to change. Again. Sometimes the world shifts not with earthquakes or revolutions, but with the quiet courage of one mind daring to see what everyone else overlooked. And there are moments when a single idea, born from years of rejection and silent endurance, becomes strong enough to bend industries, rewrite narratives, and awaken continents. For the boy once dismissed as worthless, this was the instant destiny stepped forward, not as a whisper, but as a force the world could no longer ignore. His innovation was about cutting through borders like wind, carrying the scent of a new era. The project that would change everything began the same way many breakthroughs do, quietly, in a corner of a crowded workspace where the hum of machines mixed with the rustle of endless notes. He had been tasked with designing a sustainable system for regions affected by resource scarcity, a challenge many believed required massive funding, complex technology, and global cooperation. Yet as he stared at the problem, his mind slipped back to the villages of his childhood, places where people survived with nothing but resilience, improvisation, and ancestral wisdom passed down through generations. He began sketching patterns, considering materials, remembering the way farmers, in his home found solutions with bare hands and unshakable patience. What emerged from those memories was not a traditional blueprint. It was a phenomenon waiting to be born. His design blended ancient African techniques with emerging technologies. It allowed communities to generate energy, purify water, store crops, and share resources using methods so efficient, so adaptable, that even the top engineers at the Institute paused in disbelief. His idea did not need massive machines or wealthy investors. It needed only the intelligence of cultural memory and the precision of modern science. When he presented it to the review panel, the room fell into a stunned silence that stretched long enough to make his heart race. Then, slowly, expressions shifted, skepticism melting into awe, curiosity into admiration. Within weeks, international scientists tested his idea. Journalists requested interviews. Humanitarian groups reached out for details. A leading organization piloted his design in 3 countries. The results were beyond anything predicted. The system produced more than expected, cost less than imagined, and transformed community life so rapidly that global headlines began circulating his name like a rising windstorm. The world wanted to know who he was. Newspapers called him the African prodigy, reshaping the future. Innovation forums labeled him a visionary born from the soil, not from privilege. Children in villages whispered his name with hope, and elders blessed him through cracked voices carrying pride across generations. But amidst the noise, the boy walked with the same humility shaped by childhood rejection. He never forgot sitting alone on dusty evenings, drawing patterns in the sand to escape loneliness. He never forgot villagers whispering he would never become anything of worth. He never forgot the boy he once was, the child who had learned to turn pain into fuel. Now he walked through global halls of power with a quiet dignity that commanded deeper respect than any loud triumph could. His innovation was invited to the largest global innovation conference of the year. A gathering streamed across continents, attended by leaders, scholars, and millions watching from their homes. When he stepped onto the stage, the lights softened around him, and the hall rose in applause so thunderous it vibrated through his bones. He felt none of the fear that once shadowed his life. He felt only the pulse of purpose, the steady rhythm of knowing he belonged to the future unfolding before him. He began his presentation with calm confidence, sharing the journey that shaped the idea, the markets that smelled of dust and fruit, the long nights studying under dim lamps, the mentor who believed in him, the failures that sharpened his brilliance. His voice carried balance, strength laced with humility, precision softened by emotion. The audience listened without blinking, captivated by the fusion of intellect and soul. Then, as he reached the climax of his speech, ready to reveal the final expansion of his project, the giant screen behind him flickered. The hall dimmed slightly. Murmurs rippled through the audience. Technicians froze, confused, trying to understand what was happening. And then, the image appeared. The ancient symbol, the same one carved into the wooden token the mentor had given him years ago, shone across the massive screen in glowing lines of silver and midnight blue. Intricate, beautiful, unmistakable. A symbol that belonged to a past he still did not fully understand, yet one that had followed him like a shadow through every chapter of his rise. But no one in the control booth had projected it. No one at the conference recognized it. The system logs showed nothing. The hall fell into a thick, breathless silence as the symbol pulsed like a heartbeat on the screen. Every face turned toward him, awaiting his explanation, expecting him to understand what none of them could. And in that charged moment, he felt destiny tighten around him once more, as footsteps approached from the back of the hall. Some crowns do not glitter. They rise quietly from the ashes of every moment a soul chose perseverance over surrender. True leadership rarely descends upon those who chase it. It is drawn instead to the one who endured, the one who learned to breathe through storms the world never bothered to name. And sometimes fate arrives not as a reward, but as an undeniable recognition of a spirit shaped by battles fought in silence. For the boy once rejected by all, this was the moment destiny placed its hands upon his shoulders and asked him to stand where he never believed he belonged. The aftermath of the international conference felt like a tidal wave that refused to settle. His innovation spread across continents within weeks, turning villages into living examples of resilience reborn, turning global institutions into eager partners, turning the world's attention toward the young African man who had once been pushed aside by everyone around him. Interviews filled his days. Invitations flooded his inbox, and his name echoed through corridors of power where he had once feared to even exist as a shadow. Yet through all the noise, he moved with the quiet steadiness that had carried him through rejection, failure, and isolation. His rise was not loud. It was inevitable. And then the invitation arrived. It came in an envelope sealed with a gold emblem older than any corporation he had ever worked with. When he opened it, the contents made his breath pause as if the air itself had thickened. A global consortium, one made up of leaders who shaped industries, nations, and humanitarian systems, had summoned him to a private meeting. They cited his innovation, his leadership, his attitude under pressure, and something deeper, the rare mixture of intellect and compassion that could alter the future of millions. He stepped into their headquarters days later, escorted through marble halls that gleamed beneath soft indirect lighting, guided into a chamber built like a sanctuary of power. Inside, the world's most influential figures waited with expressions carefully composed, yet carrying a subtle hint of anticipation. He recognized some from screens, others from articles he once read in the dim glow of the single lantern in his childhood home. They sat around a long wooden table, carved with symbols he didn't recognize, symbols that strangely resembled the carved token the mentor had once given him. Something in the universe felt aligned in a way he could not explain. After formal greetings, the room shifted into a silence so thick he could hear his own heartbeat. Then the chairperson rose, her voice steady but heavy with meaning, and began recounting his journey. Each milestone, each sacrifice, each triumph forged from pain. She spoke of the brilliance he had shown in innovation, of the empathy he carried into every solution, of the quiet strength that made even the most hardened executives pay attention when he spoke. The longer she talked, the more the weight of his own story pressed against his chest. When she finally reached the end, she said the words that struck him deeper than any praise could. They wanted him to become the youngest director in the consortium's history, the youngest global leader overseeing solutions for entire continents, the first African from a humble background to sit at that table, a position with influence so vast it made his palms grow warm. The room watched him with breathless expectation, waiting to witness what kind of man he would be in the face of such power. He stood there, frozen, memories swirling through him like a silent storm, nights sleeping hungry, villagers mocking him, his mother's cracked hands holding him through anguish, the loneliness of being unwanted, the broken voice that whispered back then that maybe he was not meant for anything at all. And now, here he was, standing at the center of a destiny larger than anything he had dared to imagine. Emotion swelled inside him, rising from the deepest fractures of his past. He felt gratitude, disbelief, humility, and a tremor of fear. Not fear of failing, but fear of forgetting the road that built him. He inhaled slowly, grounding himself in the memory of every hardship that had carved the strength they now called brilliance. He finally lifted his head, steady and resolute. The board leaned forward in unison. They believed he would accept, because who would refuse the crown of global influence? Who would hesitate when the world offered a seat that had been closed to millions before him? But he was not a man shaped by hunger for power. He was shaped by wounds, by whispers, by the breath of forgotten children who had once sat where he sat. He could not simply accept without honoring the responsibility he carried. So he spoke, and instead of agreeing, he made a request so unexpected that even the chairperson's composure cracked. The room froze as his words sank in, sharp, unwavering, impossible to ignore. The world's most powerful leaders stared at him as if he had revealed something they were unprepared to confront. And in the stillness that followed, he felt destiny shift its weight, waiting to see if they were strong enough to meet his demand. What he asked for next would determine not just his future, but the future of millions. There are moments in a life shaped by suffering when the soul finally understands that rising alone is not triumph. It is abandonment. And as he stood before the world's most powerful leaders, he felt the quiet echo of every night he cried into the dirt. Every day he walked beneath the weight of rejection. Every breath he carried when no one believed he deserved a future. Greatness had come to him wrapped in applause and global attention, yet all he could feel was the trembling memory of the boy who once had nothing but hope hidden beneath wounds the world refused to see. It was in that breath-held moment he realized he could not simply accept power. He had to turn it into a bridge for those still trapped where he once lived. He lifted his eyes slowly, letting the silence settle across the long mahogany table polished by decades of decisions that shaped nations. The faces before him were carved with experience and authority. Men and women who had commanded industries, rewritten economies, and guided continents. Yet none of their stories carried the raw ache of abandonment he had known. For a moment he felt the weight of that difference, the impossible distance between the barefoot child who once slept beside broken clay walls and the man now standing before world leaders whose signatures shaped the future. But instead of shrinking beneath the magnitude of the moment, something inside him steadied. An old resilience sharpened through every humiliation he survived. He spoke slowly, not because he lacked confidence, but because his words carried the weight of thousands of forgotten children whose stories He told them that poverty itself, programs, emotional support foundations, technological access hubs in rural regions, and mentorship systems embedded directly into communities where children often grew up believing they were invisible. He called for funds so large that even the most hardened economists in the room blinked in disbelief. He called for a future that lifted the silence. At first, the hesitation was thick, almost defensive. Voices trembled on the edge of resistance. Pens hovered above pages. Glances exchanged like silent warnings. Yet as he continued, the tone shifted. Not because of his status, but because of the unshakable sincerity that filled every word he spoke. His voice carried the quiet conviction of someone who had walked through storms most leaders only studied in reports. The more he spoke, the more the tension dissolved into a reluctant recognition. This was not a man chasing ambition. This was a man protecting a promise forged in suffering. One by one, leaders softened. Questions became considerations. Considerations became agreements. Agreements became signatures. And gradually, the world's most influential figures leaned back, not in resistance, but in awe. They realized they were not granting him a favor. They were answering a call far larger than any of them could have imagined. Months later, programs reopened forgotten schools. Children who once sold scraps now sat in classrooms filled with books and hope. Villages that once slept in shadows glowed with new learning centers. Mentors arrived in communities where dreams had been buried generations ago. His vision spread not as charity, but as transformation. And across continents, his name became the emblem of possibility, the boy the world rejected, now lifting the rejected of the world. He did not seek the praise. He did not bask in glory. He simply watched the change unfold with a quiet gratitude that softened the edges of every scar he carried. Years later, as he finally returned to the village that once turned away from him, dust rose beneath his footsteps like an old memory awakening. At first he saw no movement, only silence hovering in the air like a held breath. And then slowly, from every corner of the village, crowds emerged, waiting in reverent stillness for the boy they once rejected to step before them again. Some returns do not begin with footsteps. They begin with the deep tremble of a world preparing to rewrite its memory. And sometimes, the boy they once overlooked comes back carrying the quiet weight of greatness, turning every gaze toward him with reverence and disbelief. He walked into the village not as one seeking recognition, but as one who had finally made peace with the long road behind him. The dust rose gently around his feet, drifting like soft echoes of the past that once tried to bury him. Every step he took revealed a new layer of transformation, his posture steadier, his eyes sharper, his silence heavy with stories that needed no introduction. Yet beneath all of it lived an unshakable humility, the kind that could bend even the proudest hearts. The first to notice him were the children clustered under the shade of a mango tree, their small wooden trays filled with freshly picked fruit. They had only heard pieces of his story, whispers shared by elders during long evenings, tales that blended sorrow with awe. But seeing him now, kneeling down to greet them gently, their tiny faces lit up in wonder. His smile carried warmth, the type that reassured them they were seen, valued, and not too small to matter. In that simple moment, he restored something the village had long forgotten: dignity in the smallest of souls. Adults slowly emerged, drawn by murmurs spreading across the square. Some froze mid-step. Some tried to hide their shock behind forced smiles. But most simply stared, their pride bending under the weight of memories they wished they could erase. These were the same people who once brushed past his struggles, who let him walk alone into storms without offering shelter. Now they faced him, not as the fragile boy they had belittled, but as a symbol of resilience they could no longer deny. Without a word from him, their hearts shifted, heads bowed. Old wounds they carried, not just his, began to loosen like knots slowly untying. He did not return with accusations. He did not return to reopen wounds or to demand apologies. His presence alone carried a quiet wisdom, one that reminded them that growth is not a weapon, but a light that exposes the truth of every heart. And as he walked past familiar doorways, the air felt different, gentler, cleansed, reverent. Houses that once shut their doors to him now held open windows, letting out the scent of warm meals and soft regrets. When he reached the middle of the village, the elders stood waiting, their faces lined with years of decisions both wise and flawed. They looked at him as though seeing the future and their own past collide in one body. Their leader stepped forward, his voice trembling not with authority, but with remorse, softened by respect. Yet before he could speak, the boy, now a celebrated man, lifted his hand gently, signaling that words were unnecessary. His forgiveness came not through speech, but through the calm acceptance in his eyes. Still, the journey was not complete. He moved quietly toward the one place that had shaped the deepest part of him, the old tree at the edge of the village. Its branches stretched wide like an elder who had watched generations come and go. This was where he once sat alone, where his tears fell unnoticed into the roots, where his dreams trembled under the weight of hopelessness. Standing beneath it now, he felt time fold into itself. The breeze pressed against him, carrying fragments of memories he had long tucked away. He closed his eyes for a moment and inhaled, steady and slow, letting the air settle into the spaces of his heart that still felt tender. There was strength in this return, but there was also vulnerability, an unspoken acknowledgement that healing is never a straight path, and even triumph carries remnants of old pain. He touched the rough bark, feeling the story of every ring inside it, and for the first time, he let himself release the last piece of sorrow he had carried across miles. But just as he stepped back from the tree, a soft voice emerged from behind him, calling his name with a familiarity that froze his breath. He turned slowly, and in that single moment, the past he thought he had finally outrun began walking toward him, ready to reveal the truth he never expected to face. Let your journey with this tale continue beyond today, for every voice that joins us strengthens the heartbeat of these stories. If this chapter stirred something within you, honor the moment by subscribing and sharing your thoughts so the circle of listeners grows wider. Your presence shapes the stories yet untold, guiding the path of the next revelation. Stay close, for what comes next carries a truth powerful enough to change how you see every story that follows.